Hi, well, thanks for coming to Animal Disaster Preparedness and wanting to make it. We did originally have Boulder County Animal Control to come and present with Monica from Office of Disaster Management, but they got called on a board meeting, so they have to put that out. So she's going to be presenting on their portion, and then we will end it with Dr. Sarah Andre, and Mary, who's a dog trainer with her dog cluster as well. So, leave your questions at the end of the presentation. Don't take questions at the end of her, at the end of her. So.
Thank you, Taylor. Alrighty, so hello, everybody. As Taylor mentioned, I'm Monica Weber from Boulder Office of Disaster Management. I'm one of the coordinators there, and I work with all of our community preparedness and outreach. So that's why you're here with me tonight. And then I'm also representing our animal control partners that we work really closely with. So while I might not have some of the in-depth knowledge that they have, we've got other folks here that are experts on animals, and I'll be able to share pieces of it. I just might not have answers to certain questions, but the rest of the presentation still stands as normal. So we can go on to the next slide. So for tonight, we're going to look at my portion of it is talking about emergency alerts, just so you have a baseline of how to get information during a disaster. And we've also got a little bit about assessing your risk with your pets in mind, and then also how to create a plan, again, for you human folks in your household and your pets as well. So we can move on. So out of curiosity, and folks that are online as well, you can join in the chat if you'd like, but the question on the slide reads, how are you typically notified or made aware of disasters or emergencies when they're happening? So curiosity, you can throw it in the chat or share in person with me. There's probably no wrong answer.
I actually still have a landline.
Certainly.
In the fire.
Yeah. Yeah. One. So yeah, phone call through a landline. Other ways you all get it. Cell phone. In what kind of way? Phone call, text. Okay, like it just flashed through. Okay, kind of like an Amber Alert style. Great. We'll talk a little bit about those. Any other way?
Rachel online says reverse 911 as well.
Reverse 911. Yeah, that can mean a couple things. We'll talk about some of the names that we use, but reverse 911 might mean different things to different people, but that is absolutely correct. People call all kinds of alerts. One. Pager. You know, that's a good question of how alert, I suppose it looks like the phone number is just registered through. Yeah, but great. That could be an option I don't think we've ever discussed. So I also have a pager that's somewhere in my apartment that is for my job if we were to get called in for things. So there we go. All right, well, those are great options. So this, oh my, okay, if you click, I think it should bring them up in not. Okay, it does. Okay, so we'll just go one at a time. So first type of notification, I got real nervous that they were all like black on a black background. Not super easy for anybody to understand. First type of notification we'll talk about is news. And that's not meant to like throw it back at people and say like, oh, you have to know, but rather trusting that gut is really what we mean by this. If you see, hear, smell something, just feel that something's like off, trust that feeling and go with it. Because we've had folks share experiences where they've tried to encourage neighbors of, hey, we have to go. It's really smoky, your back fence is on fire, and the neighbor legitimately saying, no, we haven't got an alert yet. And so really encouraging folks to like trust that gut, trust the people that care about you, that are sensing things out in our environment to know, hey, we should get going. Because sometimes the infrastructure that we'll talk about with some of these formalized alerts can fail if they get burned over. We have high wind and they get knocked out, right? There's different elements that can change it. So you and trusting that gut, always go with that first. Next is neighbors and friends. So you have people in the community that care about you, even if it's like your terrible neighbor that doesn't care too much for you, they're probably so hopefully going to be a good person to say, like, hey, something's happening. Did you hear about this? Right? And we know, like, I feel like there's, next door, all these kind of things where people are throwing stuff out there immediately before it gets to any kind of formal alert. So that can be a helpful way to learn about things in an informal way. We also got Everbridge opt-in alert. So for some folks, that's what they refer to as like reverse 911. So that's an alert that you sign up for, or if you have a landline, you get automatically enrolled in. But then with your account, we'll talk about this more in depth, you can kind of manipulate it to have more specified things come through. Then we've got the Reach Well translation app, which we will also talk, that's one of the two that we'll talk about more in depth tonight. So that's a neat way to get alerts as well. Then we've got wireless emergency alerts, so that's like you mentioned, the kind that kind of just blast through your phone. It's coming through like an Amber Alert, whether you like it or not. And that's all related to cell tower connectivity. So if you're near a cell tower that's in kind of the perimeter of the alerting area, you'll get that kind of wireless emergency alert or WIA. And there'll be a national test of that system into the federal system on October 4th. So buckle up, because we're all gonna be in a like choir of phones going off around noon here in Colorado. So that'll be that. Then we've got the emergency alert system, which is the type of notifications that'll come through if you have like traditional TV, not like your Netflix on, but TV that's hooked up to cable or something like that. And that'll also come through on the radio, like that kind of like noise, and then a robot talks to you. That's what the EAS system is, and typically used for weather type of events. Then we've got all hazards weather radios, which is the name might imply, for again, weather related events. So flash flooding, hail, tornado, those kind of things that we get the joy of experiencing in our county. Then we've got outdoor warning sirens, a key here, and I know I'm going through these all fast. The point is not to have you like retain every single one of these, but rather just know there's a whole lot of things. And I'll talk about why that's helpful. So outdoor warning sirens, they're meant to be used if you're outdoors. If you're indoors and you can unfortunately hear it, or fortunately, depending on how you choose to view sirens, you can then use that to take action. And then we've got door to door, that's used when law enforcement, when we have people come in from other areas to come help us out, or if we have enough law enforcement, they'll go door to door to not help folks get out, that might not get these alerts in other kind of traditional ways. And then social media. My caveat with social media is always just like, verify your source. So if you have like a person in your life that you're like, oh, they're saying you don't have to evacuate, or we do, or something wild. Just maybe use your critical thinking skills to think like, is this accurate? Should I trust this person? And maybe vet it out in different ways, which you can use our website, boulderodm.gov to do that, or any other trusted news source that you might want to rely on. The importance of these and why I go over all of them very briefly, right, except for the two that we'll hit on, is really to underscore using a layered approach. So making sure that you're not just picking one, but that you've got a couple of these that you can utilize. So if one fails, or if there's some kind of error anyway along that process, that you can still get it. So with that, we'll dive deeper into two. The first one is Everbridge. And so Everbridge is kind of been rebranded in the county as VOCO Alert. Kind of have it make more sense, because Everbridge for most folks are like, is that an event website? What do I do with that? No, it's the software system name. But this type of alert is the kind that, again, landlines are automatically enrolled in once a quarter, or we really encourage everyone, even if you have a landline that's enrolled in it, to make an account of your own. This is really important for a couple reasons. One, you can pick if you want call, text, email, or all of it. And then secondly, you can manage your account, so you can add additional phone numbers. If you have a cell phone, a work phone, a home phone, you can add all of those in, so those notifications go to any of the devices you would like them to. And in addition, you can add up to 5 addresses. And this is really critical for this component, because you will only get notifications if the addresses that are affiliated with your account are in the alerting area. And we'll talk about how an alerting area gets determined. But folks sometimes will ask, if something was happening over at my friend's house across town, I didn't get an alert. Why? The reason is because your address isn't in that area that's deemed at risk by our first responders that are out there for determining that alert area. So that's really important, just to add and kind of manipulate that account. And then if you feel like 5 addresses just isn't enough, Reachwell can be your best friend. Not because it does give you all the alerts throughout the county, which might sound really overwhelming at first. You're like, dear God, I don't need to hear what's happening everywhere. But I have this app because I figured if I'm going to tell people to get it, I should probably know what it's like. And it's not too bad. We get maybe one every other week or so. So really not too intense. The reason that we acquired this as a county in the first place was because it helped us hit the language translation piece of making sure that everybody has access to emergency alerts. So folks that get this app, it's all free, you get it on your phone, you can search for VOCO Alert, and then people can select, there's over 100 languages in there, and so everything then in the app is all in the language that they're choosing. And then it gets alerts in real time, so that's really helpful. I'm making a maybe wild assumption that everyone here understands English fairly well, but if you don't and you're here, you can use this, and if you know people in your life might not have English as a first language, this can be a really great tool to have folks use. So yeah. So I think about Boulder County owns or sort of manages these apps, they are trusted. Yes, these are, trusted things, yeah, we don't own them, but they're third party software that we, contract with, so yeah, they're all legitimate, it's not just like some buddy behind their computer, being like, I think that there's something going on down the block. These are all real vetted, and these come directly from our 911 center, which we'll talk about, I think, in the next slide. Yes, so how an alert is born into the world. This is kind of a chaotic looking drawing. But it's a streamlined process so people understand, because often folks are like, ODM sends the alerts. I feel very lucky that we have actually nothing to do with sending alerts. It's a whole lot of pressure off of me and my peer. So the way an alert is born into the world is that these faceless first responders up here, fire and law enforcement, they get called out to a 911 call, let's say it is a fire. They're then out on the call, sizing it up, taking into account the environment, weather conditions, topography, any of those kinds of things, and assessing where do we think is at risk, and what level of alert do we need to send out? Do we need to send out an evacuation order? Is it a warning? Is it an advisory? Those are the three terms that we use in our county. So once they determine that, they then contact our dispatch centers. Dispatchers then take that information that relates them, enter it into their software systems that they have, and then it pumps out to you in all the ways that we talked about on that slide earlier. That was a long list of things. So that's how the alerts get to you. Other things that might be used are door-to-door, like we mentioned, or PA systems on first response vehicles can get used at times, but that's how that flows. And one thing to know about our county is that since Marshall Fire, the whole county has been divided up into predetermined alerting areas, which helps speed up that process immensely. So rather than someone saying, we need from this road over north to this road, and then the west boundary is this, and having to kind of articulate that over sometimes like very shoddy radio systems, because if there's already bad weather, they're in inclement conditions, it's windy, that's hard to hear. So it can take time to verify because the dispatchers don't want to send out incorrect information. That's also very important. So now that simplifies it, as instead of having to draw those boundaries, one of the responders can say, hey, we need 59E evacuated, and then great, it's all programmed into the system. So that's just something about alerts and how they are born into the world. So that was like a quick hit on the alert and warning part. The next thing we're going to talk about is creating a plan. And so this has like traditionally I teach it for humans, but this is going to have a pet layer on it as well, because that's why we're here too. But for your pets to be prepared, it's also really important for you to be prepared, because those go very much hand in hand. So first components of the plan are those first three things: actionable, sustainable, and to make a plan, you really encourage folks to assess their risk. So just to gauge, any idea on what would be actionable? Fairly straightforward, but able to be done. Yes, it is realistic. You can actually do it. It's not some pie in the sky idea of like, I'm a helicopter out of here. I'm not, I don't know anybody with such a tool at their, disposal. I don't feel like I'm going to know anybody with a helicopter, so it's not a good idea, right? So that can't be my plan. So assessing kind of what you have as options, and then sustainable thoughts on what that means. And the online community, you can also throw in the chat if you have ideas.
You could do it anytime.
Yeah.
You remake it or reset it.
Yeah, correct. So something that can, I don't like to use the word of the definition, but it can sustain for long enough. It can keep going as long as we would need it. A very simple example that I use of this is related to food. You have a household of 4 and you decide, we have a box of granola bars, our food plan is set. Well, I hope that you are not in whatever situation you're in for any course over like a long time where you're all going to have a personal in-house, in-family, whatever that might be, disaster of everyone being hangry and exploding, right? So making sure that as you plan, you're thinking through like, what is the duration that we might need this thing for? That could be related to powering devices, food, shelter, any of those kind of things. So another key point also in creating your plan, just to think about on the back burner, is just assessing your risks. So that can be for things like if you know you have a large amount of pets, or pets that might have special needs, taking those into account of what might be higher risk about some of those situations for them and for you. If you live in a spot that might have only one way in, one way out, right? For your roads, you might think, okay, maybe we need to get evacuated sooner than an order actually comes through. So when you get a warning, or if I think something's up, maybe that's when you wanna start taking that into account. So that's kind of what we mean by assessing risk, is just taking a look at your environment, your personal abilities, skills, and just assessing that, and assessing your pet too. We teach this workshop also for like equine stuff, which I'm more familiar with, just in terms of that preparedness world. So something that we talk to folks about is like, well, that's a different type of sized animal, thinking about like, what is your animal's behavior? Do you have the skills to kind of manage that? And so, like, I already have an unruly 100-pound dog. What does that potentially look like during that? What steps might you need to take to kind of make sure that you're safe and that your animal is safe? So, is that kind of making sense? That's right. And then plan components that we'll talk through, the 3 big ones, because you could go down a rabbit hole and come up with like a 9-page plan. I don't necessarily encourage that, because I don't think you're gonna get it out and read it during the disaster, but to each their own. But we really encourage folks to make a brief kind of rundown of what you're gonna do around communication, evacuation, and a grab list, which maybe you're like, a grab list, I've not heard of that, I've heard of a go kit. We'll talk about how those 2 can blend together. So for the first bit, communication, we talked about the alerts. You want to think about how you're going to get information in general, right? How you are going to receive information so that you can take the proper action for you and your animals to be able to stay safe. So that's signing up for those alerts, figuring out vetted sources that you trust, whether it is our website, whether it's other news sources or the live friend, that's got insider scoop, whatever it might be. Figuring out how to get information, also having key contacts. Out of curiosity, and online folks, you can raise your hand on online if you want. But how many of you know more than 3 phone numbers that are not 911 that you can call right now without having to pull your phone out? Yay, you have 2 people, that's wonderful. I think like, oh, I know my work phone, I know, my aunt and uncle's home phone, not super helpful, they don't live in the state. So thinking about there's key contacts that you need. Oftentimes we keep everything in our electronic devices. And what happens if that loses power? If you run it over as you're scrambling out of your home, if your pet eats it. My dog bit through my phone at some point, no joke, and I was like, well, not very disaster luckily, but I was like, this is an interesting turn of events. Pretty mad that I'm on it. So thinking about if you were to lose that device, how would you get in contact with loved ones, a veterinarian that you might have that knows your animal, knows conditions that your animal has. So thinking about that, we encourage folks finding alternatives that work for you. If that's great, I'm in my household, but then other people in my household all have this contact. Maybe you write it down, you keep it in your wallet somewhere, you can tattoo it on yourself, whatever makes sense for you in your life, to make sure that you've got an ability that if you found a phone, if yours was out of service for whatever reason, you can still make contact with people that you need to. I think that's important, not only from a yes, for your pet kind of reason, but also all of us probably have people that we know care about us and we care about them. And your stress levels probably aren't going to go down if you're like, I'm evacuated. Where are all the people that I care about? Right. And so for you, helping to lower people's stress levels with that as well, you can get in touch with, right? Yeah.
You mentioned that maybe your aunt's cell phone who was out of date might not be useful, but wouldn't that be a good actually call to make to say, hey, can you tell everyone else that I'm okay?
It could be, yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, no, we used to actually, I took that out of this at some point and I'm trying to remember why I did, and maybe I started to edit it out on my own, but that's kind of very kind of in area, and that kind of goes to this next point, texting versus calling. When we have a disaster, what do most people do? They're on the phone with someone that they care for, being like, where are you? Are you out? What's going on, right? That overloads our cell towers immensely. And so ways that you can kind of bypass that, if you find someone that's out of the area, that can help so that it's not just a ball of communication all over us and the towers that we utilize. Another work through is that if you text, that is easier to get through than calling, because calling you have to sustain on both sides. I don't know about you all, but I feel like if I was on a call with someone I care about and all I heard was that would not lower my stress level. Like, oh my God, they're down the river somewhere. This is very bad. So thinking about just a text message off to a person to let them know, hey, I'm okay, this is where I'm at. Or do you need a ride, right? Something that is more simple. The do you need a ride? I also don't recommend that. We should do pre-planning, which is what we'll talk about on the next slide. So there's that, and then we also want to think about hardening power devices. So again, your battery dies in this, what kind of plan could you think of ahead of time where you say, okay, great, battery dies, I have a backup option, whether it's a battery pack for a phone that you can like USB into, whether that's a phone charger that you keep in your car because you have that capability in your car. So it's really just assessing what exists in your world. And again, a lot of preparedness is really just exploring the what if. And I'm a very risk averse person naturally, so for me, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the 17 options that we've thought through of what can go wrong. So if you don't naturally fall into that place, just start to kind of explore it. We have worksheet over on one of the tables that prompted some of these questions, but it's like, if this, what would you do next? Because preparedness is really kind of, when you boil it down, to about having backup options, so that if your first option fails, you still got something to rely back on and be prepared. So that's the communication part in a nutshell. Then we've got evacuation as the next portion. For this, we're going to talk about things that are, again, human-based, but you are hypothetically taking your pet with you. So that's why it's human-based. Your pet is probably not going to be like, all right, time to go. Down the road I am, unless you've done some incredible training. So with evacuation, we want to think about transportation. And what we mean by that is having not just one option, but having, again, a backup to that. So for me, I have a vehicle. I can drive it. That's all great. What if I go out to my vehicle and it does not start that day? I don't want to just be like, well, I guess I'm giving up and this is how this goes. Instead, I should do that pre-plan to figure out who can I contact. Do I have a friend that lives close by? Do I have a neighbor that I can talk to and say, hey, if I'm in a bind, could I come knock on your door or give you a call, whatever it is, to be the person that you get a ride with? Or I said, not you get a ride with, but I would get a ride with, right? And that can be traditional routes, right? Of like, okay, I'm gonna use vehicles. We had someone that we presented to one time who lived in an assisted care home, and he was very convinced, like, no one's coming to get me. So he bought himself a motorized wheelchair, and his plan was like, he was gonna scoot on out of there down the sidewalk, which, while unconventional, it was a plan. He wasn't just gonna sit there and be like, well, I guess this is where I'm gonna stay, right? And so thinking about those things for yourself. Another one to think about is routes. How many folks kind of have a good idea, like how many folks kind of go on autopilot, and when you're driving to and from work or the store or whatever, you just go the same way every time. Right? Many of us, I would say. And so this is kind of a prompt to just start exploring the areas that you live, the areas that you frequent a little more often, and take different routes. Get yourself a little lost in your neighborhood if you need to on a not disaster day. So when those days do hit, whether it's full-scale disaster or maybe the road is just closed, it's not extreme, you then know, okay, great, I have muscle memory of how to kind of navigate through this in a different way. That can again just be helpful. And with routes, what I'm going to say now, I say at every session I give, do not take these words out of context. But my goal from ODM is not telling you drive across urban space because one day you felt nervous because it was a bit windy out. That is not it. But if there is an imminent life threat, something is happening where if you don't get the heck out of there, you're in some serious trouble. You can go ahead and drive across open space, park, whatever it is. Make sure you're in a vehicle that's not going to go get stuck, because that's going to be challenging as well. But on the bike path, whatever it is, get creative with how you go back, because no one's going to chase you down and be like, oh, actually, you can't drive there when there's, flood water rising, or there's fire barreling down. There's bigger fish to fry at that point. We're not like, oh, go chase one person, unless they're worried like they're going to be in big trouble. So they might go help you get out of that. But that's just something to think about, exploring those different routes around on real roads, and then thinking about if you live, especially I think for areas that have kind of that one in, one out, is there large like plots of land near you that you would in a bind use to say, great, I'm plowing through the state, I'm just going across, right? So things to think about. Another thing to think about around evacuation is animal behavior, and I'm in no way an expert on this. I have a dog of my own, and I volunteer to post rescue, so that's the kind of limit of it. But thinking about your animals, when you're under stress, your animals might act differently just in reaction to you. But then when we add in the environmental pieces, they're also going to react because of stressors that exist in their environment. And so while you might think, oh, my dog's really great off leash, or I have a cat that is always so kind and doesn't ever scratch, bite, anything, their behavior might change significantly as well, just like we do under stress. So making sure to just take those precautions and making sure that you're keeping yourself and them safe. If you have an off-leash animal, maybe make sure to harness them up before you just open the door so they don't run off and find a new life in a field somewhere because they've decided they're very stressed, they have to go, right? So thinking about those things, thinking about crating, I know that like using blankets or pillowcases is an option. That I've heard of for like cats and whatnot, so if I don't have these supplies, I gotta get them now and keep them in a safe spot. That can be something to think about, and just that behavioral piece. And then evacuation, where to go. I think this is really critical for our pet owners to think about, because you can't just go to any typical shelter that might open up, because they don't necessarily allow pets. They will allow certain animals at any point. But if you have just kind of a traditional pet, some shelters may allow them, some may not. So with that in your pre-planning, it's really important to think about, if I can't go to just an open shelter, if I want to evacuate, do I have friends or family that are out of the area enough that I can potentially stay with my animal? And then communicating that need to them ahead of time, again, after the pre-planning of this all comes in, is make sure that whatever your plan is, you share other people that touch that plan, you share it with them, so that the day of, they're not like, oh my gosh, you're staying here now with your whole family and 16 cats? That's wild. We want to make sure that the folks that are involved in the plan know the plan, right? Because we might be relying on them to support us. So thinking about that, yeah, because like hotels, other things are an option, but that also has a financial component that's not accessible to everyone. So making sure to kind of just explore your options. And there's oftentimes, I know some shelters do allow pets, that's not say absolutely no. But you can call lines, anything like community resources will be available. If you're like, I'm really in line, I think I have to go to a shelter. And I'm 90% sure animal control can vet this out for me, but with Boulder Valley Humane and Longmont Humane, I'm pretty sure we have agreements with them that folks can take animals there. If like you need to go to a shelter, a human shelter, but you can't have your animal there, that they'll hold animals for folks that are in that situation under evacuation and not give them up for adoption or anything like that. So that's an option that I can look into to verify and that's a potential option. And then a grad list. So for people, we talk about the 7 Ps, pets are included in this. First you want to get your people, even the ones that you don't like all too much, because you should be a good person. Then grab your pet. Papers means any kind of important documentation. Prescriptions isn't just like medication that you would take, but that could be things like dentures, prescription eyeglasses, hearing aids, medical devices, anything kind of in that realm. Priceless items, so things that have some kind of sentimental value to you. Personal computers, if that's something that matters to you, and then plastic, which is not round up your recyclables, rather that's a P that fits in cutely to mean money, i.e. have a credit card or some way to pay for things. And a grad list will show an example on this next slide. So this is maybe small to see from there, but what this looks like is it's got the item listed on this for you all left-hand side, and then the location in your home on the right-hand side. And that might feel like way too geeked out for some people, like, why am I gonna be that detailed? Well, the reason that we kind of shift from go bag to grad list is that grad list is scalable and hopefully more easily updated, that you can throw things that you might need on this list, and then in an evacuation time, be able to grab them, as the name might imply. Rather than having a bag that maybe you made 3 years ago and the food's all expired, and now you have a kid or a pet that you didn't have before, and so they don't have supplies in there, and you got clothes that don't fit you anymore. So just, it allows some more like realistic workability to that. And a go bag can still be part of your grab list, right? So you can still say, I've got my bag, it's got a flashlight and a radio, some canned food that I change every once in a while. That we still really encourage folks, have it be here. But what we hear from folks that have been through disasters is that the stuff that they wish they had isn't a flashlight. Like, while that might be helpful, or, you know, other supplies, they want their photos, they want memorabilia that they've had in their house, sentimental items, a quilt their grandma made, that kind of stuff. I also should say that this touches on anything sensitive for folks. I'm not meaning to put a trigger on anyone, so if it does at any point get too overwhelming, please take care of yourself, step out if you need to. I usually say that at the beginning, so I apologize for that, but this is things that we just encourage folks have this list. It's also helpful because then if you are the responsible person in your household, let's say, and everybody else is like, yay, don't care what they're gonna bring, this gives some guidance to people. So if you're not home, being less responsible can be like, oh man, I'm supposed to grab the pet medication and the birds and box of mementos and some photos. Otherwise, people are gonna be frustrated with me in my house, right? So this is helpful for that. It's also helpful that if you're not home, a neighbor that hypothetically, or someone that you trust with the key to your home that lives nearby. We're not encouraging folks like drive into the evacuation zone, but if they're already in it and you can swing by and grab your pet and some photos, it tells them very clearly where those things are. And it's scalable as well, so if I get a warning, I can say, oh great, I can round these things up really quickly, throw them in my car and be ready to go, versus if I get an order right off the bat, I'm saying, cool, and this is my actual list, so it's like dog, harness for dog, because he's chaotic, and then photos, and outside of that, like, the rest of it, if I don't keep it, I will be okay enough knowing that I have those items at least, rather than my flashlight and a can of food, if that kind of makes sense. So, that is the spirit of the grab list. And then looking at grab list for pets, this is the kind of stuff that you could put in like a go bag type of thing. Again, maybe with the exception of the food and water piece, but having a leash or a harness or a crate, any kind of containment item for the kind of animal that you have, because this isn't just cats and dogs, this could be birds, your lizards, whatever it might be. Having vaccination records can be helpful, just so that if you do have to take them to any kind of like public place, not public place, any kind of boarding facility, things like that, they sometimes require that, so that can be helpful to have on hand. Also, a photo can be helpful, that way if somehow you and your animal get separated, you have some kind of thing that says this is my animal, right? And microchip your animal as well, that's really important, because then you've got a more official traceable record than a photo. Also grabbing medications if they're dependent on anything that really keeps their well-being up, and then vetting water, bowls, and food is also just helpful to have. Again, thinking about, we like to have some of the comfort items, and again, if you're in a quick hurry, you're probably like, let me get their bag. You're like, I have the animal, let's go. But if you have the time, grabbing some of these things, grabbing a toy that they like or whatever that might be, that helps to maybe calm their nerves as well. And again, not an animal expert, but just that's my dog. He is quite the chaotic little bowling ball of an animal. So, yeah, grab those things for them. And then, preparation, so we've kind of gone through like quick rigmarole of the things that you can do as a human and the things to prep your animal for. The next thing you want to do is kind of make that go back to them, those things that are on that grab list for animals, because it typically, like, unless your animal grows a lot, their like leash and harness probably isn't gonna extremely not fit them, or, and I feel like dogs food lasts forever. There's probably other types of food that maybe don't have that longevity, but thinking about making that go back for them. Also knowing your neighbors and knowing where your pets are going, that can be just helpful to know, great, have those connections, build those with people that live near you, to where if you were in a bind, you could say, hey, go kick in my door and go get my dog, please, right? Whatever that might be. And that's, again, not your first option. As we plan, we want to have like the nicer options, and then as we kind of funnel down to like, it's really go time, you start to take different methods, right? And so know where they're going. Again, that's that planning of, can you go to a friend or relative's house? Is there a hotel? Is that an option for you? If you're going to a shelter, do they allow animals? Just kind of thinking through those things. And then practice. This is really important, because if you have an animal that's used to being off leash or not in a crate, or it's your lizard that lives in this little kind of terrarium, and you're like, all right, we're gonna get out of here. You want to make sure that you've gone through that again, help them build that muscle memory as well, and do some of the training pieces that I know will get demonstrated later on. I'm not gonna pretend to be the expert on that. But making sure to just practice through that, so that for them, it's not the first time that they're doing it when it's already a stressful environment. You're hyped up, so they're gonna feel that kind of energy, but that you can go through it, it just becomes routine to them, you can reward them, all those kind of things, that becomes like, oh great, yeah, they're going to go get in my crate, and this is a fun time, and now we can go in the car, and it's all gonna be okay. So that's just some of the preparation to do. And then, once you're evacuated, this just to kind of reiterate, doing that pre-planning again, making sure that you know where you're going, that those folks know that you're going there as well, if it is someone's home, and making sure that's all kind of shored up. And then additional resources, if you like, our website has information on it for human preparedness, and there's a pet preparedness tab. There's also different kind of groups in there, so we have a preparedness page that you can explore. It's got like a resource library, active functional needs, all kinds of different things to check out and explore. So worksheets, handouts, quick guides, things that might be helpful. And then that is the quick rundown of all of that. But any questions that exist, we have 9 minutes to ask questions or chat about things.
What cat poses for all of your cute pictures.
Yeah, so I cannot take credit for the animal pictures that are all the cutesy, like, first response ones, because the animal control partner, so Rhiannon is the person who's gonna be here with me. She built out the slides. I just added the not cute stuff on there for my course. So that is all credit where the credit is due, not me, but they are very cute.
I was gonna add
Yeah.
just a comment about what you mentioned about animal behavior. I know from experience, one of my dogs is reactive and he's 85 pounds. So he's really big. And so I have an understanding with my neighbors that they're going to get my dog if I'm not home,
Yeah.
but it's that introduction of they need to understand his
Yeah.
behaviors or else it's not gonna be a positive outcome. So when you're practicing, I really recommend like letting whoever's gonna be coming in to help rescue your animal know those behaviors and also know how to like handle that. If they're uncomfortable, then honestly finding an alternative might be a better outcome, because I know my animal, he will resist and he's large. He's 85 pounds and my neighbor is small. And so I just wouldn't be a good outcome. So finding an alternative is always helpful.
Absolutely, I definitely seem to like assess your risk part. Well, that's maybe not like a on the surface risk. It's okay, this could really go south if I don't pull the right pieces in on this. Like, I think like similarly in the same vein of like there's special pieces, like my dog is deaf. And sometimes I say that and they're like, oh, my dog doesn't listen either. I'm like, no, he's deaf. And so for me, I have like low trust with other people because they let him go. People think, oh, he has recall, we can just get it back. I'm like, no, he's gonna be gone. It has a really high prey drive, right? So knowing like what your animal behaviors are, what kind of those sensitive points are, what training they have, because that can look different from animal to animal. What are the different commands that you might use and things so that other folks are able to handle them in a way that's positive or as positive as it can be for both the animal and the human that's interacting with them. Right? You don't want to add layers on it, like, oh, my dog just bit my neighbor. And now she's calling me very upset and oh my. Doesn't let this stuff go. Other questions on any stuff we've talked about, whether that's builder morning pieces, animal pieces. Evacuation, and yeah.
No suggestion for the third hit.
Yeah.
It's a little relaxed,
Yes.
and you can get one that's the way you want.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, those things. Yeah, foldable stuff. I'm sure like probably if you go, to any pet store or any like animal websites that sell stuff, there's probably all kinds of neat stuff that you can get. And certainly, yeah, if you have the time, like my advice to folks is if you get an evacuation order, you're probably not grabbing all the bells and whistles, right? You're like, let me get the most essential stuff and get the heck out of here. Because that's really, like, there's no strict time limit on, with an order, you have 15 minutes, with a warning, you have 30 minutes. We get the joy of living in a place where I think a lot of the like national preparedness stuff that comes out, oftentimes it's tailored more to like hurricane stuff, like you have 3 days and you know it's coming. And for us, unless it's like severe weather, winter storm kind of stuff, we're like, okay, we know it's coming, okay, this could be bad, I might lose power. You're still able to stay in your home versus when we have flash flooding or fires, that's and it's here. And so sometimes we don't always get the opportunity to have an advisory, a warning, and an order. We might just get thrown right into the order, right? And so making sure that if we're in that phase, grab the most essentials. If you can get the litter box or the bedding or any of those things, great, grab it. But also gauging and using again that gut instinct of like, okay, I have an order, and I think it's an order because it's a good precaution, or is it like, a really wild weather day, and you're like, I don't like it, I'm going. Forget it, I'm grabbing all the living things in my house and do stuff there, right? So yeah, that's a great point. One of those kind of other things, again, you can have to be helpful because you don't want your cat going to doctor places and then having to figure out what in the world do I do with this? That doesn't help you out at all, so. Yeah. Other questions or online folks, any questions that you have? Yeah.
Can you tell us more about your role at Boulder?
Yeah. So my role in our office, I taught a class last night.
Can you just repeat the question?
Oh, yeah.
For the individuals online,
Yes,
I didn't
thank
hear
you.
you.
Yeah, so the question was for me to talk a little bit more about my role at Boulder Office of Disaster Management. So I've been in my role for about a year. And my primary role on kind of our blue sky days, or the days that are not disastrous, is doing the community education and outreach component. So that's developing different kind of workshops that we offer, any of the educational materials that we have here on our website are things that I made up just to help community preparedness overall. And so we have a couple like, not special topics, but things like this, or we did one on equine preparedness. We've done preparedness for seniors, preparedness for people with active and functional needs, which is all the same base message, but with each different workshop, we just add a little more of a twist on like what are some components that like the equine community is gonna have stuff where it's like you all don't need to know how to trailer load your dog, right? Unless you have an extremely large dog. And I don't want to be like this on terrifying, but thinking about like what are those different components or active and functional needs, well, everybody should know about that. There are things that then we know, okay, great, we can talk more to the community, we can bring people in that have this experience, be able to speak to that, so it's not kind of, not dismissed. I don't think people are dismissive, but again, it gives it more weight when there's folks that have lived a certain type of experience or have experienced with certain type of animals. That's why we have other experts here, so that you're not just left with me being like, here's how you train your dog. Because I have one way that would necessarily work for everyone or even be happy, right? So that's my role, developing those workshops. If you're interested in other workshops that we offer, there's a QR code on that flyer over there, and then some flyers that you can take. Those little hat sheets, the backside has information on other workshops and with our website. So that's our role on the like blue sky days. The days when we have disasters, I work with the rest of our team. There's 5 of us in our office. There's 3 coordinators, our director and an admin, and so the 3 of us coordinators and our director work to kind of manage our emergency operations center, and we do all the support coordination. So when the incident overwhelms our first response resources or other resources, we then get activated, so we start to do the support and coordination on the back end, and there's a lot of folks that are involved in that. It's not just lights and sirens, there's people that open up shelters for both animals and humans. There's folks that manage the public health aspect, so there's a lot of other folks that are behind the scenes, kind of managing and supporting the community. And so we run the space called the EOC, or Emergency Operations Center, that those folks then work out of and help coordinate with them. So, and I have 1 minute left. So there's other questions I can answer one quickly, or we can transition to the real experts on the animal piece.
Well, thank you and your team for all that you do for that
Yeah.
coordination piece, because it doesn't happen unless all the parts.
Yeah. We'll transition on over then. My email is up on the next slide. You want that, and I have a card over on the side table as well.
Oops, sorry. Thank you. Okay, so to half of the workshop, we have Dr. Casera Andre and Mary with her dog Buster. They're going to talk about the human animal component, the relationship that we have with our pets, as well as show you how you can train your pet for evacuation. So we have a dog. Originally, you would think about having a cat. That dog was so tough to evacuate with, because maybe in the next week. But again, we have a dog. He's going to show up his skin.
And you want to put grade before we get that, or what are you doing? I think it's more interesting.
So you get it.
It's not.
I'm sure I'm proud of it.
That helps. We totally got it. We just don't have a demo.
Maybe I made a quick intro for you before you step in.
Up to you. Do you want to start or?
Yeah, I'll start and then while you settle us there.
Just kind of hang there.
Hey, everyone, and let me just, can you, let me see how I'm interacting with this, can I see what image it's showing? Yeah, perfect. Hi, everyone, online, we're so grateful that you're joining us, and for everyone in person, we're equally excited that you're here. My name is Dr. Star Andre, I'm a practicing veterinarian here in Colorado. I am also a veteran. I served as a veterinarian for the U.S. Veterinary Corps in my early career, and one of my duties, one of my jobs was actually disaster preparedness on the federal side. So here in Colorado, I serve as the branch director for the Veterinary Medical Response Corps, and our particular branch serves everything east of the Continental Divide. So think about us as the licensed practitioners, veterinarians, technicians that respond to an animal-related disaster. So if our colleagues have an animal that needs to be looked at, triage, and some input on a shelter, we're the group they call. Mary is my friend and colleague. She is a trainer in the area of her own dog training business, and Buster is her own dog. We're going to talk about a couple of different things today. I'll toss it over to Mary to do the main part of this. We'll talk about human-animal bond, a couple of really easy things you can train your dog to know how to do so they are a little bit more prepared for disaster. Before I toss it over to Mary, I'm just going to lay some groundwork for what our part is covering. We're really interested in thinking about and considering and preparing for the impact of an evacuation or being in a disaster on animals' emotional health. So we know what happens to their physical health if they're feeling involved in a disaster, receiving injury, but what really happens even if they're not physically injured? How does the stress of the evacuation or your stress as humans really impact their emotional well-being? And importantly, what can we do after the fact? So in my actual practice, in my personal practice, clinically, I work with animals with emotional trauma specifically, and some of my patients are still really affected from market fire, which was a couple of years ago. So these are long-term things that impact animal health, just like they do for human health as well, which is not something we've always chatted about. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mary to talk a little bit more about the training aspect, and then I'm do a little bit more on the human animal bond.
Sounds good. Hi, it's nice to meet you all. My name is Mary Angeli, and I have my own private practice dog training business. But I previously worked at the Humane Society of Boulder Valley as a training and behavior consultant there. I do some consulting work for the ASPCA as well. So not quite as experienced as Dr. Andre on the disaster side, but I have a lot of experience with it just naturally working with the ASPCA. Primarily what we do when I'm consulting for them is responding to disaster type situations. So since this is a nice, intimate, small setting, I actually would love to hear if anyone is not feeling too shy. What made you come tonight? Or do you have specific questions about your own pets? Or I would love to hear if anyone's willing to shout anything out. I don't know. And it's okay if not. I'll just keep
Some cat owners, the other dog, cats for everyone, dogs.
Okay. And then just a little bit of background as well. I live in Louisville, so I had to evacuate as well when the fire happened. So this is something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm super grateful to be here to be working with everybody. Okay, so a couple of things. So we could talk about a lot of these issues for hours and hours and hours. We're going to try to keep it succinct, but I would love to hear if any questions come up. So I think a couple of things. In terms of responding to disaster, I think there are two sides to this, right? And so this is partially why I was interested to hear what you were all thinking. But one aspect is how do we respond and what do we do with our pets, right? And then the other aspect is how do we deal with that afterwards? Hey, buddy, come here. It's like this is boring. I'm gonna sit down. I would like to stand or sit down just to kind of chill out things out too. Okay. So one aspect I would kind of think about, and we can talk about this from the training standpoint as well. I do think that it makes sense, cats and dogs and other animals as well, getting them very, very comfortable with crate training or being in a carrier. So personally at home, I don't have a crate for my dog, but I feel like in these scenarios, oftentimes in order to evacuate effectively, in order to go to a place where needing to be sheltered temporarily, your animal has to be able to be in a carrier or a crate when contained in some way, especially when things are happening very fast. So one thing that you could be doing just on your own time, and it can be pretty casual, it doesn't have to be something that you're working on diligently every single day, although more practice is better, is just helping your animal get comfortable with their carrier. So that's one really easy passive thing that you can work on. So if you've got a dog, you can leave their third dog guardians. Is it just you two over here? Do you have pets over here? Yeah. How many of you guys have crates already? Okay. And so I don't think it's a requirement, and not to get too existential, but in the UK, most people actually don't crate their animals. It's like a very much a United States thing. But anyway, so my dog we don't have a crate at home, but he is trained to go into a crate. And again, I think that's useful just in the event of an emergency. So if you do already have a carrier or crate of some sort at home, and if you don't, I don't think that you need to suddenly change the whole landscape of your home. But if you don't, right, something that could be a good idea is just passively have the crate or the carrier door open, periodically put some really awesome stuff in there, whether it's treats, catnip, your dog or cat's favorite toys, right? And so every so often they go over there, they stumble onto something amazing. It's gonna make them more inclined to want to go in there and to check out that space. I think the tough thing about crates and carriers, and specifically for our feline friends, oftentimes they're only being put in there if they have to go somewhere stressful, like the vet, or there's an emergency or something else is occurring. So the more we can normalize that for them, the easier it's gonna be in the case of an actual emergency occurring. Any questions about that at all? No, we're feeling good? Okay, anything you want to add?
I'll just add a few, yeah, for kind of back and forth. I brought a couple of crates just to be able to chat through the you aren't normally keeping your animal in a crate, so using some object that gives them a sense of safe space is really nice to think about. Maybe you don't usually want to use a crate. You evacuate with your dog, let's say on a leash, having something that does not need to them safe car, does not need to keep them out of any trouble, but just being able to set it up somewhere for them, have a place for them to go, or when you ever happens to give them some peace and quiet, can really help with some of those situations. You can go everywhere from crates that have really, really strong interiors, that are really good for car safety if there is an accident. These are more for you train your dog, go into them and use them all the time, they can stand up, close down, but really nice to think about what size is your animal like. And then you get up, stand around, move around. This is actually my cat's carrier. I like this one because it is pretty sturdy, so even if we're in the car together, there's a car accident, he may be pretty sore from being tossed around the side. He's gonna be okay without a car. What's also nice about this is it lets them have an airflow, thinking about that, and people there is place to breathe, they don't feel so stressed. Just thinking about what your crate actually looks like and really enhance the ability of your animals in the midst of something else really dramatic going on.
Yeah, and I like the pop-up idea also because that's something that you can get your animal used to going into a space. And then that can be folded up and put away when you're not using it, for those of you who don't already have carriers and crates out. The other thing I would say as well, just to help, again, the big thing is to help normalize these things for them. So in the event of an emergency, when you really need them to go, you're not having to struggle and add additional stress to the whole entire situation. Okay, so then the other thing I would say in terms of, I'm gonna say hello. He's one of those, I got to explore and check stuff out guys. So the other thing that I would say before we maybe use Buster and help them use them to show some things, in terms of how to respond to actual disasters and what to do with your pet. So I do think, again, being able to put them in some sort of safe, contained space is going to be important. I do know in general, and you can tell me more about this if you have additional information. I've found that a lot of times in disaster scenarios, animals have had to been able to be crated in order to go to certain shelters and things like that. That's just something to keep in mind. And then additionally, in terms of how to respond. So the next thing I'm going to talk about actually goes for any situation, whether it's a disaster. Our animals, how many of your animals would you say are stoic? We're all like, none of us. Everyone feels like their animals are pretty overt about how they feel. What about if they're going through something painful, or they're sick? It depends, right? It depends on the individual, so that's a really important factor. But the thing I would keep in mind is, and we can get really geeky about this, but evolutionarily, it makes sense to hide if there's something going on for you, if you're sick or you're ill or something like that. I think a lot of times too, in terms of when our animals are stressed, we're not always great at picking up on that, and especially in a disaster scenario, we might be stressed ourselves. And so how do we cope with ourselves being emotionally under duress, our animals as well, etc. So a couple of things. These are the handouts that you have. So there's some tips for decompression, which I'll talk about in a second. The second page, and it's not printed out as amazingly as I hoped, but the website is very clear, so you can always go to that website, feel free to have your house. There's a little bit more about body language. So I think one of the number one things that we can be doing for our pets to help them is to get really, really good at reading body language. They cannot communicate with us verbally and tell us how they're feeling or how they're doing at any given moment. So a really, really important thing on our end to help ensure that they're doing okay is to be adequate and good at reading their body language. And that's their best way of communicating with us and for us to figure out how they're actually doing. So I think in disaster scenarios, it's really important for us to have a good read of our own individual pets. In that second page, you're going to see some body language guidelines. Those are generalizations, but they can vary from pet to pet. So again, really important to know your own individual animal, right? And the thing that I would kind of keep in mind there is if you're seeing along the lines of like fear, anxiety, stress, right, that spectrum, if you're starting to see them climb up that ladder, just like we do, then it's your job as their pet parent, pet guardian to intervene and to help them feel comfortable. The more comfortable an animal feels, the less you're going to see outbursts, right, of aggression, reactivity, all that kind of stuff. As an aside, I specialize in fear, reactivity, and aggression, so I'm super used to it. But I do think if we can read our animal's body language, that's going to help us with helping them cope with stress. And then just a few other things to consider as well. After stressful events, it's really nice to give your animal and its needs a time for decompression. So as much as you can, right, really go back to basics, get back down to your regular routine. Offering some consistency and regularity is going to help them get more relaxed more quickly, settle in more quickly. That's really important. It can be really tempting to distract yourself and I'm going to go to this party, or I'm going to go to this event and do this thing, and I'm going to take my pet with me. And they may not want to do that, right? So really keeping things calm and steady and slow and quiet and being really patient is super important. How many of you were affected by the Marshall fires? Okay, everybody, right? Like we were all in the community. And so I would think about, you know, I don't want to talk about it too much, it's very difficult. But I would think about how long it took yourself to feel safe and comfortable again. I had to evacuate and it was right around the holidays, right? We had to grab all of our stuff and go. We're staying at someone else's house, and they were good friends of ours who very graciously opened their space to us, but it's still really, really stressful under the best of circumstances. So just keeping in mind that your pets feed off of what you're experiencing and they're stressed themselves. No matter what, you know, for us, we went to a really nice house with a huge yard, and Buster, I think, had a pretty good time, but it's still a very big upheaval in your normal, regular routine, which is stressful. So really, really important to just take things slow and let your pet come to you and let them initiate contact. Does anyone have any questions about any of that?
Kind of just, there's a few different things, reasons why I'm here.
Yeah, go for it.
Definitely small animal part of things, also for the large animal, but I'm a firefighter in Sunshine Canyon.
Okay, amazing.
But I'm also a resident.
Yep.
So there's these sort of cross sections of, okay, if it's fire, you think this way, but as far as, you know, being, you know, doggy dad, I'm like, but if I'm not home, yes, I have access to the canyon, I can get through, but, you know, as the neighborhood, like we're probably all part of, there's still that other part of me that's like, and how do we really start thinking about all the pieces of, I'm probably not gonna be with my pet, we think we're gonna be, so we can just jet and go.
Sure.
But the reality is it's totally different, so it's like, you know, yeah, I'm interested in a couple different ways, but yeah, thinking of different ideas about how to truly apply everything that's going on.
Yeah, that's a great addition. I think, you know, I was fortunate enough to have been home and before they closed everything off, because if we weren't home, my partner and I, we wouldn't have been able to get to our dog. We have a dog door that stays open, so in the event that we couldn't get back, we were like, we hoped that he could get out of the house. I think it is complicated if you have a pet that's nervous about unfamiliar people. But if you do have a neighbor, somebody close by, you can go in there. I think having and we can talk about this in a second, having your pet, and you can do this for cats too, you can do this for rabbits, you can do this for all animals, maybe not fish, that's a little harder. But making sure your animal has really good recall is huge. So let's say you couldn't get back to your home, but your neighbor's there and you're like, hey, you can grab my dog, can you please help? having them come into your house, they can call your dog comes right out. So like a really, really good recall, I think is very important, so coming when calls. And then making sure that all of your supplies, which I think was talked about previously, are easily accessible. So hey, my cat carrier is right in this closet when you get in the door. You know what I mean? So things like being right at your entry points, I think would be important.
So I think this, feasibly, if you guys are kind of. So I think feasibly, right, like, just, those kinds of things logistically, I think having a really solid recall is a huge part of this. I think another portion that's probably really helpful is if you, prior to an emergency happening, you discuss with your neighbors, hey, in the event that I'm not home, you know what I mean, could we coordinate where maybe you come and help me out and come help me grab my pets. I think the other thing I would say too, again, all of this stuff from a training standpoint will be helpful. But I do think like the number one thing is like a really good recall. And then if you do have a pet that's worried about unfamiliar people, maybe you do some work on the front end to help them get a little bit more comfortable. So if something does happen and you're not home, somebody can still come in and safely get them out. Other questions that you have about that?
Yeah, I mean, just as you're like listening to things going on, like, you know,
Yeah.
in your bed, like, I think one thing, our team is like really supportive of each other, good community, I think. I'm thinking about some kind of Google Doc where we put
Yeah.
whatever name that's like, the thing, because we have lost dogs at least one in your places.
Sure.
But it coincides with this too, it's like, I think that, you know, everybody has a neighbor maybe, or you don't, your neighbor's not home, use your second or third call.
Yeah.
You can logistically get there, so those kinds of things that, you know, you guys are talking, what I'm interested in.
Yeah, what I have done since the Marshall fire, so I did not have a plan, like a go bag previously, so we have that now, and we have one for our pets, right? The other thing I have, so occasionally we go on vacation or we go out of town, so we've got some pet sitters that will help facilitate walking our pets. So in addition to that, on that document, I've added like emergency contacts and where they live, etc. So if something happens and I couldn't get back, like who are the next go-to people that could be reached out to? And that's something that I could readily just send to somebody else. You know what I mean? So whenever we fly or we do something, I send that to a few people and they all have it. So just some things to kind of think about logistically, not to get too morbid, but I think it's good to have a plan, especially because we were so caught off guard previously.
Especially if you have a community that's already in it together. Really practicing an evacuation is the best thing to do, both from a human perspective and an animal perspective. And you know that from your firefighter. So
Yeah.
from the animal owner, it can be really hard to intentionally stuff my animal out on a Saturday. Oh, it's gonna be so hard. But I promise that it's way better after the fact when they've been through a stressful event. Oh, I got stuck in the car. And then it was fine. And then we went back to home. And then we went back to sleep. Just having a few of those experiences makes a huge difference. There is actually there are a couple of programs being developed now post Marshall fire to address some of those. One of them being done by Animal Health Now, and it's essentially an evacuation app where you can identify which neighbors get told about and some secure information that we release whenever you decide.
Yeah, help now.
Animal Health Now is a background organization, planning that. Some of the other things that can be really, really helpful is for you to work in advance on touch sensitivity to your animal. Does everyone know what I mean when I say that they're okay with receiving a touch from somebody else? So it doesn't matter whether it's the vet, whether it's the dog sitter, whether it's your friends, whether it's you, just that they're okay with being manipulated. Push to the side, and sometimes if you have an animal that's really touch averse, no matter what you do to plan, it's not gonna be better because they just don't like to be handled. And your animal's probably not the best in the vet clinic. They're probably not the best at getting their vaccines or a blood drawn. So these are some things you can work on in advance that make whatever happens in their lifetime easier. You create that resiliency in advance, and then the evacuation is not the hard part because you've already tackled through those touch issues and kind of address and consent.
Yeah, so
Yes, question.
you have advice for how to do that, like is it just and then kind of reward with that, so they start to associate like it's okay, like.
Yeah,
where's the
absolutely.
right ways
And there's some pretty good protocols on how to work with that. In general, it is creating a positive association
with receiving some form of touch. And we watched Buster do a couple of just distraction techniques today. This is really useful whenever they're in clinic and we're giving a vaccine or drawing blood. The sensation of having a needle prick is not actually that big. It's the, oh my gosh, it's horrible, that works. And so getting some practice in and helping them be sensitized from them, oh, it wasn't that bad, I guess it'll be fine. It's actually that nervous system being able to tune it out or tune it down. I like to teach a lot of massage, therapeutic massage, and in evacuation scenarios, having some of those touch techniques that the animal already knows. What does it mean when I kind of touch your chest here? What does it mean whenever I sort of stand with you and we just rock together? Those can be really good ways to help an animal who is reacting. We've heard a couple of those comments already. Be more subtle with respectful. Evacuation. Any other questions on that? Great question. Okay, so I think if you had to make a list for actual like training behaviors, and you can add to this if you have additional, please do. So I think one thing that would be great, so recall or something like call, the way that I like to teach that is by teaching the animal to come and touch my hand. You can do that with cats and dogs, like you can, I've done it with rabbits. He loves this, he loves it. I've done it with rabbits, it's really fun. So just teaching the dog to touch their nose to your hand, and I'll show you that in a second. But that's helpful with maneuvering them and not having quite so much to actually physically be handling them. That's really nice because they're maneuvering themselves. The other thing, treats. The other thing that I'd probably add to your list, just as Dr. Andre was saying, is getting them used to touch. So one of the ways that I used to teach this to puppies when I was working at Boulder Humane, we do this with my dog too. He's not worried about being touched, but I give my dog a heads up. Gotcha. It means I'm about to grab you, and then I give you something good. Like that's it. If any of you notice he had like half of the tail wag there, because he knows that when I say gotcha, I'm gonna grab him and then something awesome happens. And so I'm teaching him to enjoy that versus I grab you at random and it scares you and I'm only grabbing you when I need to shove you into a carrier if it's an emergency, right? So really normalizing all of these behaviors is super, super helpful. Any questions about that? And so I would just add that collar sensitivity, head shyness, like collar reactivity is such a problem in dogs that have underlying anxiety or reactivity. And once that's that, you just always see them like, don't touch my neck, don't touch my collar. And that's so hard for someone to come in and help your animal. So working on things like a collar to a grab signal can make a world of difference. Yeah, and then not to try things too much, people probably from getting too that too much, but the coming when called, so touching their nose to your hand, those types of things, that's a skill that you're asking the dog to do, right? They're doing a behavior. When you're working on something like handling and pairing that with a treat, that's just learning by association. The animal isn't actually doing anything per se. So things that you would keep in mind, I know, I didn't see him all this dinner. And I was like, I'm hungry, and I was like, okay. So the thing I would keep in mind, right, if I'm working with an animal that is, let's say they're practiced, if they're worried about their collar being grabbed or their harness being grabbed, right, he's got a collar on. I'm not just gonna start by being like, then I come in, I grab the dog really hard. Even there, he dealt with that, but he saw, so he's kind of like, what's going on here? Granted, I also kicked the terrier. But what we would do is we would start at the animal's face. So if I was working with an animal that was reactive or worried about me, they didn't know me, I'm not going to expect them to be okay with me suddenly picking them up, right? And so if I really want to like make this really easy, but I don't smell like that area. Right, what I might start with is, I might say, I reach towards the dog or that or other stuff, and then I do that. Right, so I might say, animal, do that a little fun until the animal is exhibiting relaxed, comfortable body language. And I'm like, okay, this is looking pretty good, you're doing well, I'm doing well, we're gonna make it a little bit harder. And so just remember if you're practicing your own animals, the ideal is you start at the level that they can handle. Because I can guarantee if you go home tonight, you're like, come to practice. I'm gonna pick up my cat and shove them into a carrier. It's probably not gonna be ideal for them or for you. And so the whole point is if you're trying to go at their pace, and if you're doing that, then it's gonna be easier for us to be successful in the long run. Any questions about that? Okay. What should we do? You want to do some targeting? It's pretty easy for you. Okay. So to teach touch, and if you have questions, I'm always happy to have you shoot me an email or something. My contact info is there. But just like super briefly, so Buster knows the skill already. It's one of the first things I taught him. I think touch is really good or hand targeting for a million different things.
namely the big one here is the coming when called. But again, it's really nice to maneuver your animals. You can get them to tuck into a crate or into the car, out of the car, what have you. So he can do it from pretty far away. Yeah, good job. Right, so good stuff. He's pretty excited about doing it because he really likes the treats. Go ahead, buddy, look at that. It's almost 12, so he doesn't know what fast about it. Yeah, good job. Okay, so he's pretty good at it, and we worked with this quite a bit. I found him since he was, I think, 5. But I can use touch to pretty much get him to go anywhere I need him to. So if I need him to go up some stairs, into the car, we just do a touch into the car. If I want him to go into a space, we'll do touch for that. Granted, keep in mind, right, if your pet is worried about going into an enclosed space, you have to work on that first before you get them walking there for that. But I think teaching an animal touch is really nice. If you're gonna start from scratch, so and again, use some facts. Absolutely. What's your good name? Silent. Silent. Okay. Well, how far away can you touch them? Yeah. He's pretty close to me. He could do like this circle. That's awesome. He can't quite do like past that. Sure. Okay. So if you're gonna teach an animal how to do this from scratch, what you would start very close. And any sort of orientation towards your hand you're gonna take. So I'm gonna put my hand really close. Yes. Even if they're just sniffing your hand because they're thinking you might have a treat, that's fine. That's getting the behavior to happen. And as they get the same distance, right? I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times in a row, move a little further, and it just depends on whatever your goal is. If you want them to be able to do it from across the room or really close or what have you. Another thing that you can do is something down. A month, right? Otherwise, you have to take off. Right, so again, looks like for example, saying this has a nice combo with easy. And that's a nice way for me to be able to ask him to go in here. And again, he is not crate trained, but we don't have a crate at home. So as you can see, I know I'm a trainer, but we don't do that much training at home. We work on this something happening. So yeah, so this is the same way to maneuver your dog or your other pets without having to handle them and grab them and like do something that might be considered a burden. And of course, like lazy but still equally effective is if you just want to toss things in there and get your animal to clear on their own. That's fine too. So lots of options there. Does anyone have any questions about touch or targets? Okay.
I would add, don't limit your animals what you think they can do. Just because you think your cat can't learn touch, nothing to do with their skill set. So many times it's our perception of what we think they're able to or interested in doing, but really our interaction, giving them an idea of what's going on around them is one of the best ways to help them through that stressful situation. I know what pet needs, I know what sit needs, I know this is my carrier, I know this is my mat. Just things that are stable in their environment are really effective ways to help the chaos spread around. Yes.
Do you save touch or anything, or do you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm taking the quick and dirty version, but if I was working with a client to be teaching them how to teach their animals from scratch, we unless you can bet $50, the animal is going to do it. You don't actually add a verbal if you want to do it until then. So if I'm teaching an animal that has no history of doing this before, I'm just gonna do this whole bunch. And then once they're getting it correct, and I'm pretty confident they know what they're doing, then I'll add a verbal to it. Because what I don't want is the animal doesn't know how to do it. I'm like, put my hand out and I'm just kind of like sitting there, right? I didn't care what I was requesting for the behavior. So we usually don't add a verbal on until after the animal's pretty sweet. And then again, right, like the other nice thing about this too is like it's not just a verbal, it's a hand signal. So if your animal's hearing or vision impaired, you've got a lot of options. Right, so I'll say come sometimes or touch or whatever, and I have multiple options for requesting, but that's a really, really great question. Other questions about this behavior or other behaviors that you're thinking about with your own pets? Anything you want to add? Add that, the Red Cross is working to make all of the shelters, co-house, so co-housing animals and humans together. Which it means that there's a lot that needs to be thought about in making sure an animal, there's a lot going on, is safe, and how we deal with family units who are sheltered. And what happens when
animal board or frustrated, and maybe thinking about some of the.
Get it out, buddy, get it out.
So it really is important to think about some of these things, and what's nice about these ideas is that it's good for your animal in every phase. It's not just in preparing for an evacuation, it's better at the clinic, it's better, when you need to trim its toenails, when you need to go sit at a brewery and hang out. Just being able to navigate life, sorry. Easily is really, really important. It's also really nice just for leash walking too, if you're walking your dog. Getting them to maneuver on leash, but has some great public skills. This can be applied to a lot of different scenarios. So yeah, that's a really good point. So we have about 10-15 minutes left.
Well,
Yes.
so you want to say on your experience, silence, how your company in for.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so Taylor asked about my own cat, Silas is his name. And just my experience working with him to prep him for a disaster. I'm very fortunate in that he is stuck with me. And he doesn't get to choose, and so I get to experiment with all the things he has in his life. And so I was part of my team was involved in Martha Fire, didn't respond to the disaster itself, but just from a community perspective and kind of the animal health issues afterwards. We've been trying to problem solve a lot of those issues, and one of them is how do we protect animals emotionally from traumatic events? So the training protocol that I started with my own cat, Marshall Fire, has really been to make him comfortable in whatever space I'm in. So taking more of an emotional guidance from me than the action that he needs to do. So rewarding him when he looks to me to say, hey, are we stressed or are we not stressed? Oh, we're not stressed. Okay, I'm good. And it doesn't matter much what's going on around us. It's more that he said, this isn't a stressful scenario, we're going to. So in our household, that means is that we kind of do everything together. If I'm just going to load up the car, but he's not coming with me, he still gets put in the car, and then he gets taken back in the back. Just the little bitty things that are not monumental make the difference over time. So for him, I make sure he has a harness that fit really well. That's a hard thing in kitties, but can be really important for making him feel safe and secure, and really have familiarity with other people. And what's hard about this for him in particular is he gets very attached to certain people and he's okay with them, and then the general rest of the public, who are you? I don't even know. So what we've been working on are some cues that people can say to him. Other people can tell him to get in his house. And he's like, oh, it's normal for certain people to tell me to get in my house. Or other people consider harming on. Just that extrapolation of his idea of being taken care of him. Thanks for letting me write about my cat. Any other questions?
Are there any training classes offered and that would help our community here?
That's a good question, that's a good idea. I think that, I don't think there are no classes that I'm aware that are specific to disaster response, but that's a good idea. So you just given us a great idea, but I do think also, private training is also accessible as well. So if that's something that you are interested in, or you're like, hey, I'm trying to do this at home. I went to this amazing animal preparedness class, disaster preparedness class, but I don't know how to really do this on my own. Private training could be a good option. And you can just work one-on-one with somebody and they can really curate things for you and for your pet if you feel like you need that. So that is available to you, but there are not specific group classes for that, which is a really good idea.
Doing as a group, as a community, would be nice for the kind of like everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, in the very few minutes we have left, let's chat just a little bit about caring for your animal if they do go through a stressful situation. So I won't spend too much time on this because I could talk about it all night. We want to make sure that everyone knows here and online that there are for animals that have undergone an emotional trauma, and what I mean by that is it's a stressful event. It doesn't have to be associated with a physical trauma or physical injury. Animals respond to their environment just like we do, and they form patterns. What happened last time? Well, last time the bell went off, something bad happened, last time someone knocked on the door, oh my gosh, it was scary. So what we often need to do is make sure that those negative patterns don't get set into place. That that's not the thing they think is gonna happen every single time. So Mary used the term normalize, that it's just normal to get in the car. It's just normal to have someone touch you. Sometimes it's normal to have, maybe drop up, have a feel hug and squeeze it, oh, you're fine. Just teaching some touch and be considered. Now, if you do have an animal that maybe has come from a shelter, or they've been through a traumatic circumstance, and maybe you just have an animal who seems to be terrified of the world. Who has one of this? That's becoming more and more common. Don't give up. It is really possible for us to treat some of those emotional diseases, emotional injuries for animals, just like in humans. One of the things that's important about tackling those, though, are issues of consent and making that animal feel safe. And starting with making that they understand that the world's not just this huge blur and everything happens to me, that they actually get to advocate for themselves in some circumstances and do a thing that gets the reward to have some activation of their own, really to be at the core of helping them through some of these past traumas they might have experienced. So any quick questions on reactivity or anxiety? I'm happy to take questions about actual animals. We'll keep it pretty nice and short, but I just want to make sure everyone knows that emotional trauma in animals is not a dead end. Sometimes it takes a lot of care, but it definitely happens. Comments? Okay, then I think we will close with that. I'm definitely available afterwards. I think Mary can stick around for a little bit. Thank you all for being interested in animal preparedness. It is all about your family unit, which includes those animals. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.